Ever feel like you're in over your head when it comes to negotiating?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you're trying to haggle over a price or maybe even just get your point across at work and it feels like you're suddenly back in high school, totally outmatched.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving deep into the art of negotiation, and not just any negotiation. We're talking high-stakes stuff,
Yeah.
the kind that could make or break a life.
Mm-hmm.
And to guide us through this, we have insights from a true expert in the field, Chris Voss. He's a former lead international kidnapping negotiator for the FBI.
Wow.
So we're talking incredibly intense pressure cooker situations. His book, Never Split the Difference, is packed with these incredible stories from his time in the FBI. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Voss makes a compelling argument that the very same skills he used to free hostages can actually help us navigate all sorts of negotiations in our daily lives.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people listening are probably thinking, well, I'm not dealing with terrorists.
Okay.
But what was interesting, and I think you'll get into this, is that he kind of started from this very traditional place, like the Harvard Law School approach.
Exactly. Voss starts his journey at Harvard Law School, where negotiation is taught very much as a logical, rational game.
Yeah.
All about finding the win-win,
Yeah.
crunching the numbers, making those concessions.
Right. This is what I'm willing to accept.
Yeah, right. It's very by the book.
Huh.
But then he goes from that ivory tower straight into the trenches,
Yeah.
facing down hostage takers and terrorists.
Right. Where the textbook kind of goes out the window.
Yeah. Exactly. Because hostage takers, they're not exactly known for their calm demeanor and their willingness to compromise, right?
Right.
So what happens when logic and irrationality hit that wall of raw emotion and unpredictable behavior?
It's kind of like, how do you even begin to reason with someone who's driven by fear, desperation, all those intense feelings?
Yeah, because logic it doesn't really hold up in those moments.
Right.
So I'm curious, did Voss just chuck the textbook out the window and grab a megaphone?
Well, not exactly.
Hmm.
But he did realize that the FBI needed a new playbook, something more effective, something more in tune with human nature, with all its messiness and unpredictability.
So it's less about logic and more about understanding the psychology at play.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting.
So instead of spreadsheets and legal contracts, it's more about empathy, understanding what's going on in the other person's head.
Yeah, and Voss really emphasizes this idea of connecting on a human level, even in those extreme situations.
Okay, so how does he actually do that? What's the secret sauce?
Well, one of the key techniques he talks about is something called mirroring.
Mirroring, like copying someone's body language. I've heard of that.
It's kind of like that, but it goes beyond just mimicking gestures. It's about reflecting back the other person's words, their tone, almost like an echo, to show that you're really listening.
Okay, I can see how that might work in a casual conversation, but in a hostage situation.
Right. Voss gives this really intense example in his book. It's a bank robbery. And the hostage taker is this guy named Chris Watts. Watts is really agitated, unpredictable, a loose cannon, basically.
Okay, so how do you mirror someone like that without, escalating the situation?
Well, that's the surprising part. Instead of matching Watts's intensity, Voss actually used a really calm, low voice. He describes it as his late-night FM DJ voice.
Interesting. So even though the words are reflecting what the hostage taker is saying, the tone is completely different.
Exactly. And what Voss found was that this approach, this mirroring with a calm tone, it actually helped to de-escalate the situation. Think about it. When someone really listens to you, doesn't it make you feel a little more understood, even if you don't agree with them?
It definitely makes you feel heard, that's for sure.
Right. And that feeling of being heard, of being acknowledged, it can be really disarming, especially in a high-pressure situation where someone's feeling trapped or misunderstood.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could work, but some people might hear this and think, wait a minute, isn't this manipulative? Like a Jedi mind trick or something.
Yeah, I can see why someone might think that, but Voss is really clear that it's not about manipulation. It's about establishing trust and understanding.
Okay, so it's more about building a bridge than tricking someone into crossing it.
Exactly. And that leads to another key technique that Voss talks about: labeling.
Labeling.
Yeah, and this one might sound a little strange at first, but it's basically about acknowledging the other person's emotions out loud, putting a name to them.
Oh, okay. So saying something like, you seem really angry right now.
You'd never want to be that direct about it, especially in a tense negotiation. It's more nuanced than that. It's about making an observation and doing it with empathy.
Okay, so what would that sound like in a real negotiation?
So imagine a business deal is about to fall apart. One guy is fuming, ready to walk out. But instead of getting defensive, The negotiator takes a breath and says something like, "It seems like you feel disrespected by the way this offer was presented." Something like that.
Huh. So even though it's just acknowledging the other person's feelings, it completely changes the dynamic.
Exactly. It shows that you're paying attention not just to their words, but to what's going on beneath the surface.
Right.
And that can be incredibly powerful.
Okay, so mirroring and labeling, they're both about building that connection, laying the groundwork for a more productive conversation. But what about those times when you do need to set boundaries, to stand firm? You can't just agree with everything, right? So how do you strike that balance between like building rapport but also sticking to your guns?
Well, that's where Voss throws in this curveball. He says that saying no is actually a negotiator's secret weapon.
Wait, really? No. That seems so counterintuitive.
It is. But he's not talking about being a stubborn mule. It's more about using no strategically, almost like a pressure valve.
Okay, so not just shutting the conversation down, but using it to guide things in a different direction.
Exactly. When you say no, it forces the other person to clarify, to maybe reveal more than they intended to.
So it's less about ending the discussion and more about understanding what's really at stake for everyone.
Exactly. Voss gives this great example of a college football player he worked with named Brandon. Brandon was incredibly talented, but he felt this pressure to block every opponent, even if it meant he was exhausted later in the game.
Taking on too much.
Exactly. So Voss helps him see this by saying something like, "It seems like you feel you have to be involved in every play, even if it means sacrificing your own energy."
It's kind of like giving him permission to say no to those less important tackles.
Yes. And that's huge, right? Because sometimes saying no to one thing is actually saying a bigger yes to something else that's more important.
That's so true. It's about prioritizing, right? Focusing on what really matters. Okay, so we've got mirroring, labeling, the power of no. What else does Voss have up his sleeve?
Well, he talks a lot about the power of how questions. And again, this might seem counterintuitive, but instead of making demands, you frame things as how questions that actually force the other side to come up with solutions.
So instead of saying, I need a discount, it's how can we make this work within my budget?
Exactly. You're shifting the focus from a confrontational demand to a collaborative problem-solving approach.
I love that. So it's not about one person winning and the other losing. It's about finding a way for both sides to succeed together.
Exactly. And Voss tells this incredible story about how questions were actually used in a hostage negotiation. I think it was in Ecuador.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it was an incredibly tense situation. But instead of arguing back and forth about the ransom amount, the negotiators started asking things like, how can we guarantee your safety during the exchange? Or how can we be absolutely sure that the hostage is returned unharmed?
So they're actually forcing the kidnappers to think through the logistics, the practicalities of the situation.
Exactly. And in doing so, they're shifting the power dynamic, making the kidnappers feel more in control, even though the negotiators are really the ones guiding the conversation.
That is so clever. But in these high-stakes situations, how do you even know what questions to ask? What information is really going to make a difference?
Well, that's where Voss introduces this really intriguing concept of black swans.
Black swans, like the metaphor.
Exactly. It's all about those pieces of information that are often hidden, unexpected, but can completely change the game if you know about them.
So in a negotiation, what might a black swan look like?
Imagine a hostage situation. Things seem pretty straightforward. Negotiators are working to secure a peaceful resolution. But what they don't know is that the hostage taker has a history of violence. Maybe they even killed before. That's a black swan. A piece of information that, if they'd known it beforehand, would have dramatically changed their approach.
So it's not just about getting what you want. It's about understanding the bigger picture, all the underlying factors that can make or break a deal.
Exactly. And Voss says there are 3 types of leverage you can use in a negotiation: positive, negative, and normative. Positive is like rewards, right? Offering something the other side wants. Negative leverage is about consequences, threats even. But it's the normative leverage that's often the key to uncovering those black swans.
Normative leverage, what is that?
It's about understanding the other side's values, their beliefs, what they hold sacred. Voss even calls it knowing your religion.
So not just knowing what they want, but understanding why it's so important to them.
Exactly. He tells this fascinating story about a farmer who drove his tractor all the way to Washington, D.C., threatening to blow it up on the National Mall.
Intense.
Right. And it seems completely irrational, right? But when they really dug deep, They discovered that this farmer was deeply afraid that new government policies were going to destroy his livelihood, his family's legacy, everything he'd ever worked for.
So his actions, even though they seemed extreme, they were coming from this place of deep fear and desperation.
Exactly. And once the negotiators understood his religion, so to speak, they were able to connect with him on a human level, to find common ground and ultimately diffuse the situation peacefully. And that's what's so powerful about these techniques that Voss lays out. It's not about manipulation or trickery, it's about understanding, about connection.
And the amazing thing is, like you said earlier, these techniques, they're not just for hostage negotiators or CEOs. They're tools we can all use in our daily lives.
Exactly. Think about that next time you're trying to haggle over a price, negotiate a deadline at work, even just navigate a disagreement with a loved one. These skills are invaluable no matter what the stakes are.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave you with this. What's one situation in your own life where you could use these techniques? Maybe it's an ongoing negotiation, a tough conversation you've been avoiding, or even just a chance to connect with someone on a deeper level. How could mirroring, labeling, the power of no, those how questions, or even uncovering those hidden black swans change the game for you? Until next time, happy negotiating.